Welcome to the PHP Data Grab overview video. Basically, PHP Data Grab is a database management system for your PHP website or PHP application. So you have multiple connections to different database types and multiple queries. It can handle all those. It can even help make your queries dynamic or even your connections dynamic. It can even make them dynamic based on the web servers they're coming from. Let me give you an example of that. For example, let's say you have a web development server and a web production server, and then you also have a development and production MySQL server. Now, what you don't want to have happen is your development web server talking to your production MySQL server, and also your production web server talking to your development MySQL server. You always want development talking to development and production talking to production. And Data Grab can actually do that. You can say, okay, monitor this web server. When you're running on that web server, let's execute a certain connection or certain query or both and run that query. Same thing with the production. You can detect that and then modify the query connection and run those differences. You don't actually have to go out and change your code anymore because Data Grab is going to handle that in the background for you. In fact, you don't have to code much with Data Grab because everything is done via an admin panel to configure everything. As far as your code goes, you're calling a Data Grab function and that's it. And it does all the query stuff and either comes back with data or does some kind of query execute and returns a little bit of information about that. So let's go ahead and see it in action here. First, we'll need to download the zip file to get it configured, and you can do that from clipboardcode.com. I'll put a link in the video description below. So I'll go ahead and head over to clipboardcode.com, and from the menu here, go to PHP Data Grab. And you're going to see a lot of instructions right here, some features list, getting started guide. It talks about the admin panel, the functions that we're going to call. Notice there's a JavaScript function and a PHP function. It will work with either one. A cool thing about JavaScript is it uses an AJAX method to go out and do your query and return information without ever taking the user away from the website. So that's pretty cool to have. And you can even disable that in the security settings if you don't like the JavaScript function being kind of exposed to do queries. Some function returns, advanced, talking about resetting passwords and stuff. A lot of this I've tried to protect against SQL injections. There again, I'm not the best hacker in the world, so there may be some techniques I'm not aware of. Please let me know if you see any security risk at all. I'll try to fix it as soon as possible. But I've done a lot to especially make the dynamic parts not SQL injectionable because I'm using the binded parameters. I'm also on the non-binded parameters type stuff. I'm using a really restricted character set and word set that you can't actually send to the query. So trying to prevent as much problems as possible. Alright, let's go ahead and download the file. You'll find it right here at the top of the page. And a zip file with basically 5 files. The README file is not really counted because you can delete that when you're done. And the instructions for that are right on the website also. Data Grab is your main file that you include to your own web page. The DG settings is where all the settings get saved, and everything else is to do with the admin panel. Alright, let's look at the getting started guide on the website here. First step is extract the PHP Data Grab zip file into a folder on your web server. Alright, I'm running a local web server right here. Yours may be on some hosted site, that's fine. So I'm basically going to unzip all these files in here. Alright, step 1 complete. Step 2, using a web browser, navigate to the dglogin.php file. Alright, I'll go to my local host and to the dglogin.php. Here we're presented with a password prompt. And going back to the instructions, it says the default password is password, but you can change it, and it gives instructions in that documentation how to do that. Let's go ahead and log in now to that. Alright, we're here. Now, one note on the password thing, I may be adding some updates. I might think about doing a username, even do the CAPTCHA thing where you have to type in a certain dynamic pictured number, so make sure bots can't log in. So you may see some of those changes. Read the documentation, it'll tell you all the defaults in case I do add anything since recording this video. Alright, quite a few tabs here. The documentation tab, exactly what you see on the website. Verbatim pretty much. A link to this video that you're watching right now. We can kind of do the video inside of a video. That's pretty interesting. Web Server tab. This is completely optional. This is where you can identify all your web servers you want to monitor. Remember earlier I showed the development production example. This is where you'd kind of set that up if you needed to use that kind of system. For example, let's do a server ID. I'll call it my server under the basement. And the base URL, I'm just going to do localhost for now. Of course, your domain name or IP or whatever you want to put in there is going to be there. And you can see it says, okay, it's online right now. Cool thing about this web servers tab, it actually goes out and ping when you refresh this documentation to make sure all your servers are up and running. This might be a great place to start troubleshooting. If you do start having website problems, make sure they're all online. Alright, so let's go to connections. Connections is where you actually create a connection to your database. Let's go ahead and create one now. I'll need to give it an ID, and you'll notice anything with a light gray background is required. Anything in a dark gray background is optional or maybe optional. You kind of need to know your own servers and stuff like that to know if, let's say, for example, a port number is optional on your server connection. Alright, first we'll need to start with a connection ID. I'm going to connect to a MySQL server. Let's just call it MySQL Dev for development. Database type, right here it does support 12 different database types. I have tested Microsoft SQL and MySQL with this connection. They work fine. I don't have any of the other servers types to test, but the technique I'm using, it should work. Let me know if you have any of these other servers and they do or do not work. I'd like to kind of check that box off if I can find out if those work just fine. They should work though. Alright, I'll go ahead and choose MySQL. Server address, mine is also local, so I'll just do localhost. And I do know mine requires a port number for a MySQL server. So mine is 3306. Username, I've created one called user, and password, I'm not going to tell you. Alright, now I do encrypt the password on the settings save just in case. I mean, even though it's a PHP variable and it's never exposed to the client side, in case somebody just happened to glance at that file on your screen, they can't just write down that password real quick. That's the only reason I really encrypt it. If you look at the source code, you can probably figure out how to unencrypt it and things like that, but it's not 100% secure on the file side, but on client side it's 100% secure there because it never gets transferred to a browser per se. Alright, and I don't have a default database. I'm just going to click this test button, and you can see here in just a second it should come back hopefully and say connection passed. And there we go, connection passed. I can now add this connection to my list. And I can keep going on, keep adding different servers, different connections. Like I said, it supports a lot of them there. Alright, let's go to queries. Now I can create a query to run with that connection. Let me go ahead and show you my database I have set up just for testing purposes. I've got a simple MySQL database with a table called test inside of a database called test. In here it has a client name and an age, 4 rows of data and some miscellaneous ages here. I've got a really simple query. Basically I'm selecting the client name, the age from test, so it should give me all of those results back. So let's go back to our thing, paste that in. I need to give it a query ID, so let's just say get customer info. And then we'll say connection ID. Right there is that MySQL Dev connection that we just set up earlier in this connection tab. So I'll go ahead and choose that. Let's click the test button, and you can see immediately it says number of rows returned are 4. That's exactly what I was expecting. Now later on we're going to talk about dynamics and these answers down here and things like that. You'll also notice on queries here you have a show list button. I can actually say, okay, require this query to only run on my server under the basement. So if I had another query with the exact same ID, I could choose a different server, and the data grab would automatically switch between those two queries. Even though you're only referring to it as get customer info, it will auto switch and use, let's say, maybe a different connection, or maybe your databases are set completely different on different servers and you have to modify your query. It can handle all that. I'm going to go ahead and just add this to my list. There it is at the bottom here, and you can keep adding as many number of queries as possible. I'm going to go back to the connections tab just real quick and just show you that show list was also here under connections. You could also say only use this connection on this server. and then use the exact same connection ID for an entirely different web server detection. Alright. Dynamics tab, I'm not going to go over this right now. This is basically kind of a global dynamics. We're going to talk about more of how to do the dynamics when you actually call the function, which is most of the time you're going to be doing this. But I did place kind of a global dynamics also that you can do at all times, and I'll talk about that later on. The security tab, right now everything will log to your console, your debug console of your browser. You know, when you hit F12 you get all those tabs, and one of them is console. It can show you a lot of details, especially when you're first configuring your server. I like to keep this thing enabled even when my app goes live to production, unless I have something I really need sensitive data not to be exposed to the client side, because the console will show you all your queries and columns and all that data. But I like to be able to walk to somebody's desk, hit F12, and easily troubleshoot if something went wrong with that query, what it is. It can show that information. But you can disable that if you don't like it logging everything to the console. And then that JavaScript Ajax command I talked about earlier, where you can actually go out from the client side, talk to your database, and come back. If you want a little extra security, you can disable that. There again, I've tried as much as I could to prevent SQL injection, so hopefully you don't have to disable that. You can work with it and still feel safe. Alright, let's go ahead and go back to our documentation. Now that we have a connection and a query created, we can actually play around with our web server to do that. So I'm going to go back to our website. Follow the instructions. Yes, we did all that. In your website, where you would like to place a PHP data grab, add the following code to the top of the file. And you can see it's basically require once statement to that datagrab.php file. Alright, let's go ahead and grab that code. Let's go back to my web server. And I'm going to create a brand new file here. Let's call it test.php. We'll go ahead and edit that, and then we'll paste in that statement, require once. Alright, let's go ahead and save that. Back to the website. And using either the JavaScript or PHP data grab function call to execute, see documentation below. And you can see right here under functions it talks about how to actually call the function. And there's actually two ways to call it. Let's look at the PHP example here. You can just call it like this, which is basically creating a variable that will hold all your information about the query run. Here's the function call itself, data grab, and then the ID that you actually want to call. And then the other way to do it is with the dynamics, and we're going to talk about dynamics here in just a second, but it's a way to pass in all those dynamic variables. So let's just grab the first example. And both JavaScript and PHP are identical. Alright, let me go ahead and do a few new lines here, and let's paste in that line. Now we do have to change our ID because earlier we set one up. Let me go back to the admin panel, back to queries, and you can see we use get customer info as our ID. So I'll go ahead and put that in our source code, get customer info. Let's go ahead and save, and let's go back to a browser. Let's do a new tab and actually navigate to that test file. So localhost, and we'll go to test.php. Oops, try that again here. There we go. It ran, no errors on the screen, that's always a good thing, but we never displayed anything to the screen, so this is kind of what I expect to see. I'm going to go ahead and hit F12 here, and you're going to see it did actually do a lot to the console. Talks about the query that got ran, the web server it may have detected, the dynamics it may have replaced, which we didn't do anything here. Shows you the number of rows that were returned, so a lot of good information. Let me show you another way to actually look at the data that got returned though, because it doesn't have all the data here. So let's go back to our source code, and you notice this my data variable that we stored all the information in. So let's try to look at that. So I'm going to do a print R command, it's a PHP command, and I'll just say print my data. I'll go ahead and save that, and if we refresh now, you can see a lot of information came up here at the top. It's hard to read in this format, so let me show you a quick trick to make this a little cleaner. Let's go back to the source code. if you print a pre-tag surrounding the print R, it makes it clean up. Now pre-tag is just a simple HTML tag, but in PHP let's just do an echo, and we'll do a starting pre-tag, and then I'll do a closing pre-tag after the print R command. Alright, let's go ahead and go back to the web browser and refresh, and you can see it's a lot easier to see all of these things. So you'll notice the array that it returned didn't just return the data array, it returned a lot more. It returned an error segment. Hopefully that's empty. If there was an error, this will have the description of what the error exactly is. And hopefully the errors will also be logged here in the console if you have that enabled. The number of rows that got returned, which you can also do a count of the data segment, and it would also return that same number. So a couple of ways to actually get the number of rows in case you need to loop through it, for example building an HTML table. The keys that were returned, you notice we only had 2 keys in our select statement, so that's correct, comma delimited, just in case you need it. The query that got executed, the steps. Now this is kind of a human-friendly thing I put in there. As I'm going through the sequences, I'm logging to the steps part of the array. Kind of a human-friendly text about what I just accomplished or did not accomplish. So if you read this and it stops and you're expecting another step, you can kind of assume, oh, I need to probably troubleshoot something that can happen right after this step or during this step. And then the array itself under the data segment, and you can see exactly what we're expecting. 4 rows of data starting at 0, 1, 2, and 3 with our client name and our age from our database. Great, everything is working fine. Let's go ahead and also try the JavaScript example just real quick. So I'm going to go back to my source code, and I'll just create a script tag, and I'm going to basically copy the exact same example from the PHP, but a JavaScript variable does not start with a $sign, so I need to get rid of that. Alright, now you also, other than the console log, we need to do something where we can actually see the data. And you can do alerts or things like that, but you can actually take that my data and print it to the console also. So if you just do console.log and the variable you want, we'll see it on that F12 screen when we run this. I'm going to go ahead and comment out the PHP. I don't want to see all that data on the console log. That way you know everything I'm doing here is coming from the JavaScript side. And typically, of course, you would set this up to hit run during a button or unload if you want to. I just have it running right when the page loads. Alright, let's go back to the page and refresh. And there we go. And you can see here it returned this object. That's what we did the console log. It did do console logging just like the PHP did of all the different steps it tried. Alright, we can open this up and you can see the exact same information that we saw before: error, keys, query, rows, steps, and in our object, sorry, there's our data object, data right there. Row 0, here's our age and our client name. So everything is working from the client side. That's pretty awesome. Alright, let's go ahead and look back on our documentation and see what else we can do with this. So we were talking about dynamics earlier, where we can actually change the array and make it dynamic. So let me go back to my MySQL Workbench and let's change this query up a little bit here and test with it. So we have 4 names with 4 ages. Let's say we want the age to be the dynamic part. Somebody on our web forum says, okay, give me all the customers with age over, let's say 37. 37 would return Rick James, he's 39, and John Doe, 55. So I'll add a where statement where age is greater than 37. And we run that, and you can see those 2 names appear. So that works just fine. So let's copy that part. Let's go back to our admin panel, back to the queries, and I can edit the previous query that I saved earlier. And I can add that where statement. I can test it if I want to see it did return 2 rows. And we're good to go there. Now this is not dynamic yet. 37's manually typed in there, so I do need to make it dynamic. Now anytime you have a where value you need to make dynamic, this is where you're going to be using a prepared binded statement. And it's really easy to do. So this is talking about age. So let's just create a prepared binded statement by doing a colon and the word we want to identify this as, colon age. Makes sense in this situation. and that should prevent any kind of SQL injection there. All right. Now I can test this right now, but it's going to fail. Return row 0 because we have not fulfilled that dynamic. When we actually call the function in our code, we're going to do that. But you can do it here in the test program too. I did include this test dynamic answers where you basically put in that that keyword you're looking for. Here it's :age, and then you comma, and then you type in the value you want to test with. Now if you have more than one, you just separate them by pipe symbol and you can do your other dynamics. So now when I test it, number of rows returned 2, and you can see that's working fine. All right, let's go ahead and save that. All right, let's go back to our source code, and we're going to add some dynamics. Let's just do it on the JavaScript side here. So I'm just going to go up to my documentation, and let's grab that example for JavaScript. There it is. All right, so I'm creating a dynamics array to store all my dynamics information. And then it says, okay, you need to type in what is the key that you're looking for. Our key is :age, and then the value you want to actually fill that in, so 37. All right, now when I actually call the data grab function, I do need to give it the second parameter. So right after the ID that I'm calling, I'll do a comma, and then I'll give it that dynamics array that we set up right here. All right, we'll go ahead and save that. Let's go back to the web browser and refresh. All right, let's go look at our console here. And you can see number of rows returned 2. We look at our data. Exactly what we expected to see. Rick James and John Doe are the only two because they were the only two over 37. Alright, dynamics are working pretty good here. Let me show you a couple more dynamics really quick. I'm going to go back to my control panel, or admin panel, back to queries. Let's edit this query again. Now this is, like I said, a binded parameter dynamic, but you can do a little bit more. Let's say in each of your databases, or your databases, one in production, one development, this word is a little different. You're trying something else new. So you need to make this column name dynamic. Now only the where values get the binded parameter. But you can make other things dynamic as long as the value of that dynamic does not have one of these special characters in it or the word union in it. These are the characters that a lot of people, when they do SQL injection, get away with and kind of insert into your database. So I will not allow these in a value in a other dynamic other than the where prepared binding that you see here. So let's just create one here. I'm going to call it, let's do a bracket, my call name. And close bracket. Something unique. There again, it's going to do a string replacement. It's going to be looking for this part of the string and replacing it with a value later on. So you don't want it to be something naturally in your query, of course, because it would be replacing it everywhere it found that string. So I usually just like to start with these brackets and then type in my name here. All right, let's go ahead and we can test that. I'll add to my dynamic test here. I'm going to be replacing that with, and it was client name, I believe. And we'll go ahead and do a test. Number of rows affected 2. Perfect. All right. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's go back to my source code, and let's add a new dynamic. And in here I need the value that I'm replacing, which was my call name, and I'm replacing that with client name. All right. Go back to our web browser and refresh. Let's check our object, number of rows returned. So everything is working exactly like it did, even though my query is completely changed. You can see here, select my call name. It basically changed that to client name. And here's age, and it's making sure that got set to 37 when the query got executed. So all the dynamics are working just fine. So that's pretty much it for the data grab here on how to get it working. Here again, have fun with it. Let me know how everything goes. Let's go and look at the website really quick to make sure there's nothing else I want to talk about here. Talks about everything we talked about here, some examples, definitely gets into the SQL injection rules for dynamics. all those function returns that we showed return. Cool thing is about these returns, they will always be there. Even if the query breaks pretty bad, you should be able to view those data sets and figure out what's going on. I usually always say, okay, right after a query, check to see if error is blank. If it's not blank, then you get to handle that error, how you want it to display to the user, and debug that. Advanced security, talk about that a little bit more. The login password, you can actually change that in the DG settings file. And it even talks about an advanced setting where you can return a JSON string. Earlier in our example, we were calling everything into a named array, all these things here, but you can actually say, okay, give me just a JSON return string. And if you know what that means and how to use it, you'll like that for some setups. All right, if there are any questions, bugs you find, anything at all, features, especially security-wise, let me know in the comments or email me from clipboardcode.com. I would love to hear it. I want to make sure this project is a good project, a secure project. So that's it. Have a great day.